All right, we are back on the Bayside Baseball Podcast this week. Mark DeLucchi is off. I'm your host, Kerry Crowley, and we've got a special guest this week, Erik Engle, host of the Locked On San Francisco podcast, fresh off of a rebrand there. And Erik, you're doing some other work as well around the Giants.
Yeah. I'm doing the Locked On Giants postcast, also doing Locked On Warriors postcast, Locked On 49ers postcast once we get into football season. So covering Giants, but also everything else around the Bay Area, really.
There we go. So looking forward to this conversation. I think it's interesting. We could talk about a team that's coming off two series wins, back-to-back series wins over the Colorado Rockies and the Cincinnati Reds. But that would be burying the story that if you play for the San Francisco Giants right now, there's a decent chance you're actually on the injured list.
Yeah, it's been a rough go lately. I mean, they've had so many guys, I think like 6 or 7 guys hit the injured list over the last 8 days. Most recently, Jung Hoo Lee, and I think the most impactful one yesterday when he slammed into that wall. I mean, the way his shoulder was when he crashed into it, the way that he left with his trainer holding it. I mean, I've had 3 shoulder surgeries myself. I've had a number of traumatic shoulder dislocations, and that to me looked very much so like a traumatic shoulder dislocation. And it would be a shock to me if he's back. I mean, anytime soon within the next couple of weeks, maybe a couple months. So I think Giants fans need to kind of brace themselves to be missing him for a while. Plus, you're missing Conforto, who's been one of your hottest hitters all year. Patrick Bailey has been in and out of the lineup, scratched yesterday with a viral illness right after coming off the concussion IL. Plus, and he got his backup on the IL. I mean, it just, like, I feel like half the Giants payroll is probably sitting down there with Blake Snell too, waiting to make a comeback though. So that's some positive news, I guess, for Giants fans.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the positive when guys are on the injured list is you're going to continually get rehab updates on when these guys are scheduled to come back. But I think I want to go back to something that you said, that the Lee injury seems to be the most impactful. And I totally agree with you, even though, look, this guy didn't have a 680 OPS or wasn't hitting anywhere close to 300 like we thought he might be by the end of the season. But this is the type of thing that where he was penciled in as your everyday leadoff hitter. He was penciled in as Bob Melvin's everyday center fielder. And Erik, we've watched this team for the last decade, 2 decades. The Giants just have really struggled to fill a void in center field. And this one feels like it could have ripple effects. I don't know how they figure out center field unless like Luis Matos comes up to the big leagues and all of a sudden plugs the hole there. Maybe it's Tyler Fitzgerald, but altogether it's just question mark after question mark.
Yeah, and I mean that outfield defense is a big question mark because you talk about a guy like Luis Matos. I mean, he's kind of a roll of the dice. He's a guy who takes risks in the outfield. He's a guy who will break in on a ball and sell out and dive for it, not really knowing if he's got backup behind him or not. And that's something you can kind of get away with if you have other plus outfielders, but right now the Giants don't have that. Tyler Fitzgerald is not a plus center fielder. I mean, he can get the job done, but he's a utility guy. And as we know, if you're a utility guy, it kind of means that you're not really a master at one thing. So and you look at the numbers of what Jung Hoo Lee has been doing and just the eye test of what he looks like in center field. I mean, the way he gets the amount of ground that guy covers like so casually is incredible. I mean, the way that he can just get from one end of center field all the way to the other, like he can start in right center and there's a ball hit on a line all the way into left center and he'll just glide over there, no problem. It doesn't even look like a tough play. And I don't think people really realize even what this guy is doing while he's out there. Plus he's got a cannon. He's got like a 93, 94 mile an hour, like average throw velocity from the outfield. So he's been everything that you have wanted in a defensive center fielder. He has been, and this is all while he's a rookie. He's still learning all of these new center fields. Like this is the first time this dude's played center field at Oracle Park, which obviously is a massive task. And though he hasn't been, the numbers aren't there at the plate, but if you watch his at bats, every single one of them, he's grinding them out. He's seeing a ton of pitches. He's hitting balls super hard all over the yard. They've just been finding gloves lately. He came so close. I mean, that Red Sox series, that he could have had like 2 home runs and like 2-3 doubles. Instead, he gets like 1 hit through that whole series. And so it's literally a game of, I mean, millimeters that he just barely missed on a pitch that if he had squared up that ball, just, I mean, barely, just any more than he did, it would have been out of the park. It would have been out of the yard. But instead, that's just baseball, as one of our great friends would say.
Exactly. So the Giants now find themselves in a really interesting position, Erik, because I think that everyone was disappointed the first, quarter of the season. I think that
Yeah.
the expectations headed into the year didn't align with what we saw through the first 40 games, where the lineup wasn't nearly as consistent as you thought it might be with Matt Chapman and Jorge Soler joining. The bullpen wasn't as good as it was last year. They weren't getting contributions from guys who'd come up from Triple-A Sacramento like they did throughout last season. But now they're at this point where it's almost like 7 injuries in 7 days. They are forced to play their kids, which is something that when a team underperforms, fans really want to see. And now I'm not convinced that all these kids are going to come up from Triple-A Sacramento and turn the season around. However, it was this time last year when Casey Schmidt came up and made an immediate impact before he tailed off, when Patrick Bailey came up and really helped out the catcher position. And you started to see this wave of young players. Now they're all a year older. How do you feel about this group's ability to kind of turn things around and provide the depth the Giants desperately need right now?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think
Yeah.
that the pitching is a lot closer than like the youth pitching prospects are a lot closer to making an impact at the big league level than the position players. So everybody obviously wants to see Luis Matos and Marco Luciano. I mean, Marco Luciano is the name that we've all been hearing for, I mean, what feels like forever at this point. And everybody wants to see him. Everybody wants to see what that guy can do. And I think when Nick Ahmed went down with that injury, a lot of fans kind of immediately jumped on that. We're like, oh, time for Luciano. And he's a streaky hitter. I mean, that's just kind of how he is. I know you have paid attention to his minor league career, and he is very, like, he'll get red hot for like a month and then he will really cool down for periods of time. And this has not been a red hot start to the Triple-A season for Luciano. He hasn't been bad, but he hasn't forced the Giants' hand to bring him up to the big leagues. And that's what I want to see from him specifically. We have seen time and time again, the Giants have these super talented prospects and they bring them up out of not necessarily the prospect forcing them to, but out of necessity for the big league club. And they put these guys in positions that they're not quite ready for. And sometimes they implode. And regardless of your talent level, if your mental set breaks down like that, you see what happens with guys like, shout out Tyler Beatty. That is kind of exactly what happened with that guy. You see the stuff. He was bouncing around. He was in Pittsburgh last, I think. And you watch him pitch and he's got good stuff on the mound. Like the quality of the pitch is there, but I don't know what it is with his mental set, with the way that he attacks batters. It's just different. He doesn't seem to have the confidence. And I think that matters a lot more than people realize. This isn't, you just bring a prospect up and they're just automatically going to turn into what our expectations are, what we've been told they have the potential to be. Like, if it's not the right situation, these guys might not produce. And that's the last thing you want to do with a guy like Marco Luciano, who's a potential franchise changer. He could be the best homegrown position player prospect the Giants have had in decades. And I don't think we should waste that on, let's just plug a hole now for a team that might make a playoff run later this year. That is, if you're a Giants fan and that's what you're rooting for is just to get back into the playoffs, man, you need to reassess, because I think that the bar is World Series. And that's what a guy like Marco Luciano can help bring back to San Francisco. And if you're going to just waste that guy on maybe getting to the playoffs this year with a team that has absolutely no shot at winning a World Series, I just completely disagree on the philosophy behind that. There's other youth, Matos, Ramos, for instance. Ramos should never, ever, ever wear a Sacramento River Cats uniform again, especially with the way he's been playing in these last couple series. But it's a mixed bag, like for every guy like Ramos that looks like they're ready, there's a guy like Luciano who I think needs some more time to develop in the minors.
Yeah, and I think you kind of spelled out the Luciano situation really well. It's part of this is just the hype that comes from signing at 16 years old. These kids from Latin America, Dominican Republic, Venezuela, they sign younger than the kids coming out of high school in the United States. And so you start to hear about them. You start to hear about Marco Luciano all the way back in 2016, 2017. That is legitimately when the Giants signed him, were tied to him, when he first popped onto the top 100 prospect radar. And he's 22 years old right now, and there's still a world of time for him to develop at Triple-A. This is probably someone who could use an entire season of at-bats at the Triple-A level. And I think that's a big distinction between where Luciano is right now and where Elliot Ramos, the 2017 first-round draft pick, is. at this juncture of his career. Ramos still had an option going into this season, so he goes down to Triple-A Sacramento, and he was the one player who, to borrow your phrase, forced the issue with the Giants. I really think that like the 1,000 OPS is what they want to see down at Triple-A Sacramento. He clearly worked on his defense and conditioning because he saw that against the Cincinnati Reds. And Erik, to me, he looks determined. He looks like, hey, Triple-A, I've mastered that level, whereas other players they've brought up, like you said, have been out of necessity. I can't wait to see what we get from Ramos, and I think that this is the time for him. Maybe he's just a platoon player, but right now, because of the injuries, he's going to get everyday at bats, and the Giants finally have to find out, and it is about time, in my book, that they do find out on Elliot Ramos.
Yeah, and I mean, Ramos went absolutely nuts versus the Reds. And I mean, all season, he didn't really have the numbers in that Colorado series, but he had moments. He came up with big clutch hits, big drawing walks in key moments, he keeping the line moving in rallies, things like that. But against the Reds, he had 4 hits, 1 walk, 3 runs, 1 RBI, 2 amazing outfield assists, amazing dive and catch. The one thing that you want to see him work on, though, I think, is his strikeouts. He did have 5 strikeouts during that series, but I think that's just, it's a sign of him being young. You know, young hitters tend to chase those breaking balls or see a lot more breaking pitches than fastballs, things like that. So you are, I think, going to see some inflated strikeout numbers as he gets used to big league pitching. But I mean, he has, I think, shown more than enough to stick at the big league level, especially on the defensive side where the Giants are kind of reeling right now. I mean, I know you still got Mike Yastrzemski, who is definitely a plus outfielder, but he's much more of a plus right fielder than a plus center fielder. And I think that they might be using him a little bit in center because Austin Slater is also out on the injured list. They're running out of outfielders. And when you look at the options, you might be looking at an outfield of, as you said, maybe Tyler Fitzgerald, but Casey Schmidt's here to play short, but you assume Fitzgerald's going to have to spend some time at short, at least until maybe a couple days filling in here or there. But the outfield very well could be Mike Yastrzemski in center. And then you got these 2 rookies on the corner, Ramos and Matos. And that's kind of a scary outfield, to be honest. I mean, Ramos makes me feel a lot better. Mike Yastrzemski, I like in right field a lot better than center field, though he can get the job done, but he's not Jung Hoo Lee. I don't even think I think I'd rather have Austin Slater's glove in center field than Mike Yastrzemski down to it. But Mike Yastrzemski obviously holds down that wall in right field like nobody's business, and like nobody ever has at Oracle Park. And not having him out there is an issue too. So if you do have Fitzgerald out in center field most of the time, I think that really helps, as much as Fitzgerald is also kind of pedestrian as a defender in center field. But point being, Ramos really, really helps out the Giants. If you don't have him, this outfield is in shambles, really, defensively. So, I mean, one other play that really impressed me last night or yesterday actually was on a line drive hit directly over Ramos's head, and he that's like the hardest play in baseball for anybody to make. Anyone who's ever played outfield at any level of baseball knows the line drive hit right at you. Trying to judge where it's going to go is tough. And he immediately, the break he got on that, the way he battled the sun on it at Oracle Park, which we know can be absolutely brutal for outfielders. We've seen so many examples of that over the years. And Ramos, I mean, read that like a book. He broke instantly on it, went right back. I mean, it didn't even look like a tough play, but when you go back and rewatch how far he went, the way he broke, how hard that ball was hit, if he makes one misstep, that ball's over his head off the wall. And he makes what looked like a casual catch at the warning track. And there is absolutely nothing casual about that. Similar to kind of what we were talking about a little bit ago with Jung Hoo Lee. I mean, these guys make these really tough plays look really easy. And that's the hallmark sign of a great fielder, especially a great outfielder.
Yeah, very much so. So, Erik, before we wrap up here, let's go big picture a little bit. The Giants are, as we said, at this juncture where they're kind of forced into a youth movement. Not something that they anticipated, not something that 2 weeks ago we could have ever predicted based on the stability that they had in the month of April. How optimistic are you right now that this team will be better a month from now? Let's say, look, what are they, 4 games under 500? That they'll be better a month from right now than they are at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, the schedule does start to heat up a little bit now. Like it hasn't been a super tough schedule to this point for the Giants. I mean, you have seen the Dodgers already, but seeing them again, and it's not really gonna slow down very much after that. And the Giants, the optimist in me wants to say in a month they can get back to 500. You know, you have all these guys coming back. You have Alex Cobb that should be making his return. Blake Snell, who just threw an immaculate inning down in Single-A San Jose yesterday, even struck out the beer batter, Kerry, which is, as you know, the
big achievement.
The most important thing of a San Jose Giants start is to strike out the beer batter. Anyways, Blake Snell looked really good. I get it's a minor league start and we can't, you know, glean too much from that, but obviously he's going to be better than what he was earlier. He's not going to have a 10 to 12 ERA all season long. It's Blake Snell. He's better than that. So the Giants at least will get some reinforcements on that end, but that's not really what they need the help with. The pitching's been pretty good, although this month the starting pitching has kind of declined from where it was in the beginning of the season, but they really need help offensively. And I think the key there absolutely is, we've kind of beat around the bush on this, Matt Chapman, Jorge Soler, the two big bats that the Giants signed in free agency. Chapman has started to come around in the last couple of days. He's hitting balls a lot harder, even balls that aren't dropping in the outfield. He's still, balls coming off the bat 100 plus miles an hour is always a good sign. And I mean, we all know what Barry Bonds used to say: hit the ball hard somewhere and good things will happen. So that's all he can do at the box. And if they're not dropping, they're not dropping, but all he can control is hitting the ball hard. So I like the direction Chapman's going in. He also picked up a hit off a right-hander yesterday, which he has just been just abysmal against right-handed pitching so far. So I think that's a big key for Chapman as well. But Jorge Soler is really the giant elephant in the room. I mean, this guy was brought in to do damage with runners on base, to drive runs in, and that is exactly what he is not doing. I mean, I think he only has one home run this year that isn't a solo home run. A lot of the moments that he's come up in, and even a lot of those home runs, feel like they came in moments that the Giants were kind of out of games already, and they weren't really clutch situations. And that's what you want to start seeing with these Giants hitters. I mean, every day I feel like the first thing I look for in a box score is runners left on base, and Giants, what they did with runners in scoring position. I mean, that is what kind of determines if this team wins or loses at this juncture. I mean, one of the most telling signs, I think, is that when the Giants have allowed 3 or fewer runs, they're 16-1 on the season. But when they've allowed 4 or more, they're 2-22. 1 run difference is just a like Grand Canyon size gap between these two things, and it's one run, and that's indicative of a couple things. One, that the Giants pitching staff, you know, they'll probably hold your opponent down to 3 runs in most games. If they do, you're going to win, like the Giants. But what this is really more telling of is that the offense can't score. Like if they can manage to score 4 runs, they'll probably win a game, because the Giants pitching staff will hold them down to 3 or less. But I mean, that just hasn't been how things have been going, especially lately. I mean, starting pitchers have started to gas out a little bit, not really going as deep into games. Logan Webb hasn't been Logan Webb as of late. I mean, he's still been getting the ground outs and things like that, but it's just, he's not been able to eat innings the same way that we've become accustomed to, the same way that he was even at the beginning of the season. I mean, he had like a 20 inning scoreless streak and real deep into games. And then that road trip, everyone just kind of, imploded on that, except for Kyle Harrison, weirdly enough, who went 2-0 on that road trip. It's very strange, while the rest of the Giants pitching staff just fell apart.
Yeah, well, let's end with that. I think the just score 4 mantra is exactly what this team needs. I think that stat that you just gave is the stat of the year to date, and something that we'll be continuing to monitor. He is Erik Engle. I'm Kerry Crowley. This is the Bayside Baseball Podcast, and definitely be sure to check out Erik's work on the Locked On Podcast Network. Erik, thank you so much.
Thanks, Kerry. Appreciate it.